Buzz.
Everywhere on the internet you'll see will say face your hive east, because that way it gets the morning sun. Where does our sun rise in the summer? The northeast. Where does it set? The northwest, right? And it just does this little circle around us, right? And when the sun rises at 2:30 in the morning, is it warm enough for the bees to fly? Or for the hive to? No, it's nonsense. Face your hive south if you can. If you can't face them south, face them west. You know, because that way they get sun during a time the temperature is likely to be warm enough for it to make a little bit of a difference. And the sun doesn't matter much in the summertime, but in the shoulder seasons, in like March and October, direct sun on the front of the hive, sometimes you get a little micro warming there, and they'll come out and do a cleansing flight. That's nice when they can get a late cleansing flight and an early cleansing flight. Face your hives south if you can. West also works. The hives in my backyard face west. I have some hives at the airport. They face south. In the summer when there's trees, they get 0 direct sun. Just like in my backyard, because they face west, they get no sun all winter long. But they still make it. Bees are pretty resilient. They're amazing. If you can, a north wind break is great. The perfect scenario is to have them face south with a privacy fence behind them that breaks all the wind, or a tree line or something, or maybe even a little lower elevation. But you have no north wind, so that's perfect. Now, I'm a big believer that things should be easy for the bees and the beekeeper. And so keeping them in one spot year-round is the easiest on me. I'm biased that way. I know people that overwinter inside. I don't want to do it. That sounds like a pain in the butt to me. Picking them up right after you fed them 100 pounds of sugar or 50 pounds of sugar, I don't want to move them around, and it's disruptive to them. Mine do just fine where they are. These are actually 2 of my backyard hives that are facing, on the top right, they are facing due west. And they will get 0 direct sunlight until late March. And then it'll be very fleeting. In the middle of the summer, they get a few hours of direct sunlight in the afternoon. You want to work your hives from behind. That's very important. Now, you don't want to interrupt the flight pattern, because it's not that they will get angry and come out for you. It's that they're on their way from here to there, and when you're in the way, it disrupts them a little bit. Sometimes they'll land on you because you look just like a bush and they're tired and they want to rest, and then you'll accidentally squish one. And so you might get stung, but they certainly will release an alarm pheromone when you get stung, which might get them going. So you want to be able to get behind your hives. If you're in Anchorage, behind a 6-foot fence or 20 feet from the property line. If your lot is less than 10,000 feet, you can't have more than 4 hives. Anybody here plan on having more than 4 hives? Good. You might end up geeking out and having more, but I recommend people start with a manageable number and let their knowledge and experience build, so that it'll decrease the number of sheer panic, oh crap moments you have. Here's the other little trick. If your hive opens up into a general use area, like a garden, for example, just put a barrier in front of it. If you put a 5 or 6 foot barrier in front of it, like out 4 or 5 feet, they will fly out of the hive, up over the barrier, and now they're above your headline, and you'll just not have any conflicts. These are my airport bees. A bear chewed them up. I got lucky. Never had bears there ever until a bear came through. This is how durable I think these dang poly hives are. I was able to fix that with Gorilla Glue. I took the big chunks and glued them back together, and it's fine. This other hive was on the hillside. I told him to leave the frames out so that the bees could clean them up, because there had been honey in them. And I told him to leave them on his deck, but he decided to leave them in his backyard, and they were destroyed. As you can see, bears just tear them up. I used to teach a whole thing about all the different hive types. I'm not now because there's one that works better than all the others in Alaska. That's the big thing in Alaska. There's good research that shows they build more comb, they raise more brood, and you get more honey from insulated hives. The utility of wood is, if you're trying to start doing bees and you can't afford poly boxes and you can get wood boxes, you can get started. I appreciate that. I totally get it. I appreciate how expensive this hobby is, and it can get very expensive, especially if you continually keep buying more stuff like I do. So, so yes, and they're great for frame storage. I have wooden boxes. I use them for frame storage, you know, because unused frames don't have to be insulated, all right? And one of the strategies that will happen in the winter is or in the spring and the fall, is you will put a feeder on top and you'll put it inside an insulated box. You can't put it inside an insulated box that has frames in it. Where are you going to put the frames that go in this box? Having a wooden box is a place to stack them, organize them, is a great way to do it. You'll probably hear people talk about 2 queen hives. Yeah, don't try it your first year, is my recommendation. And the research shows with poly hives, you don't need them. Unless you plan on having a split right from the start, in which they're very handy. But with a poly hive, that increased heat allows them to raise more brood, and you have better production than with a 2 queen hive in wood. This is a B max. It's like, I don't know, 1.5 inches. Superior hives are thicker and more expensive. It's a really good question. How warm is warm enough? It depends on where you are. And
I just wonder for Anchorage or elsewhere in Alaska, it's like if we could just magic wand it, would we have a
well, I put extra on in the winter. Okay, and especially extra above, which is we'll talk about in my wintering class, because you lose 75% of the heat through the roof, just like with your house. If you don't put more above, if you have the same amount on the sides and the top, and that's how these hives come, by the way, same amount of the hives in the top, then you can kill your bees through condensation, dripping. Cold bees are just like cold people, don't stay warm very well. All right, I glue the joints together. Matt was here last week, you guys remember him? He's an engineer, he's super smart. He goes, oh, I don't glue them, I use finishing nails. Don't argue with an engineer about the best way to keep stuff together. But I use Gorilla Glue. 2 coats of exterior paint, and all brands work. I recommend all mediums. Every frame fits every box, and it's lighter. And old beekeepers often say they wish they would have switched to all mediums earlier. Here's why I use all mediums. Every frame fits every box. If I have a frame that has honey in this box, I go, look, you guys have stored all this honey in this frame. I can take it and put it in my honey super and put another frame down in there and replace it. I can't do that if my brood boxes are deeps and my honey box is a deep, if there's a mismatch. Likewise, sharing between hives, every frame fits every hive. Right? It just, for me, that convenience is tremendous. I make changes in smaller increments. So if they're ready for another box, I'm adding this much space instead of a third more, which keeps them warmer. The less space they have, the more easily they can control the temperature and the humidity. They need heat for everything. This is a tropical insect that we're raising in a subarctic environment. When you help them retain their heat, they build more comb, they raise more brood, you'll get more honey. They need heat to reduce nectar to honey. The research shows you get about a third more honey. So anyway, you want them to be warm, and that involves being tight. So if you put a great big empty box on here, on top, you just gave them that much more space to heat. All right, I can still do it, but it's less disruptive because I'm doing it in smaller increments.
They're also lighter.
That was next.
And then one other question.
They are 1/3 lighter, about 60 pounds max. A deep is 90 pounds max. And I literally gave myself a hernia the first time I ever lifted a deep box. But I use different frames because brood comb gets dark because of the buildup of some detritus and the cocoons. It can darken the color of honey and change the flavor. That's what they say. I can't taste the difference, but I don't have a very sophisticated palate. I know I've talked with people who could taste honey and tell you what flowers they came from. That's not me. The older the comb gets, it kind of gets chewier. I mean, like I'm not chewing it, but you guys know what I mean. It's like the consistency of it changes. And so when you go to uncap it to get honey out of, you wrestle with that frame to get it uncapped. You wrestle with it. New comb is much more fragile, top scrape right off. So it really does help to have different comb for brood and honey. But again, if you're new, that's something you'll worry about next year. I highly recommend a black foundation. Anybody have a problem seeing the eggs in the bottom of that black foundation? Yeah, now look at the yellow. Yeah, now imagine you're trying to find the right spot in your progressive lenses, and all the young people are laughing at us now. And it's cloudy and the light's kind of flat. It's super hard. This makes it much easier for new beekeepers to see what's going on. And you certainly will never confuse that pollen with just the back of a cell that doesn't have anything in it, right? That's just really obvious. I recommend plastic frames. It kind of goes against my whole general, naturalistic approach. But they last longer and they never warp. You're not having fun until you have a wood frame come apart on you during an inspection. You lift it up by the ears and the bottom drops off. And you know who doesn't appreciate that? The bees that were on the frame that dropped back on there, or the bees that got landed on. So I use plastic frames that are one piece. Also, when you're extracting honey, again, you will extract honey from some of these frames someday, even if you're a first-year beekeeper. These don't come apart in the extractor. Remember when I said it has to be easy for the beekeeper too? Pretty much what I mean by that is I want to pull a frame up, I get it up. Comb's nice and straight and even, no cross combing. If I put these in here, sometimes bees will draw it this way. They will connect these two together. And then you open it up and you have to tear that comb out because you can't inspect it. You can't find a queen in that mess. You can't take it apart, you can't do anything with it. And so what you've got to do, you've got to tear it out. Now they have to redraw it. Remember I said they only have so much energy to draw comb, raise brood, forage. You're making them redraw comb. They draw it straight if you have black plastic foundation and put an extra coat of wax on it.
How do you apply the wax?
How do I apply the wax? I recommend you go to Value Village and buy a cheap, like those electric skillets, that you change, that they're wider, okay? And so I put it in that and melt it. And then I recommend you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy the cheapest brush they've got and the 4-inch roller, both. Because the brushes will get the corners better. You can touch things up. Plus you occasionally get, you don't just paint new comb. This is an extraction issue here that happened. I don't really know what happened. They're not going to draw that back, that little hole. Not unless I take the brush and put a little wax on top. I need something smaller than a roller. So I sort all my combs in the spring and I go through, and if there's any patches like this that don't have wax on them, I will trim the wax back off the edges and then paint the frames. That extra bit matters a lot to them. Sometimes if I had a comb, so let's say in the spring I get one that looks like this. So this little area here, they've actually kind of cleaned the wax off of it. They'll do that if you leave a partially drawn frame in the hive for the winter. They'll take the wax off of it and they'll never draw it out. They just won't. So you go in and just touch it up in the spring. So you can do that two ways. You can paint it on. You can also make yourself a little cylinder of wax and then just rub it on. That does the trick most of the time.
And you use your own wax?
I use my own wax. The bees will put burr comb and stuff on the top of your frames and on the bottom of your frames. I scrape all that off all summer long, and I put it usually in like a Costco nut jar that I keep right by the colonies. And then at the end of the year, I melt it down and filter it, and that's what I use. Absolutely. Save all of your burr comb. Don't throw it away. Save it all. You will use it for something. Or somebody will say, hey, you want to give me your, I'll trade you smoked salmon for beeswax. It'll happen. You see the difference visually between unpainted comb. It does come from the factory with a light coat of wax on it. It's not enough. You want them to draw a really good, straight, even comb. I get almost no cross combing. If you do get cross combing, you got to tear it out. Make them start again. Don't go, oh, but there's brood in it. Doesn't matter. Make sure the queen isn't in it and tear it out. Sometimes they do this especially with plastic. If you don't have it painted, they'll hang the comb from here instead of attach it to this, so there's a gap behind it. Yeah, nope, that gets cut out. Can't have it. It keeps you from doing your other jobs later. Natural foundation just means there's only a frame and the bees draw it all out. Very cool, I get it. If I lived in a place like Missouri with a longer season, I 100% would use natural. It's a longer season, they have more time, you're not in the critical race. We're basically in a race, our whole season is a race. So if they had more time and a longer honey season, I would have them draw that natural comb and I would use it. But that's because you can afford to cut it out, they'll still have time to build it back up. And you can also buy natural wax foundation. I don't have a wooden frame with me, but if I did, you'd see it has a little slot in the middle of the top bar, the bottom bar, and this wax foundation. You can put natural wax foundation. It's actually all beeswax with this impression on it. I recommend against it. You have to wire it. You have to put a string in of some kind. I use fishing wire, or fishing line. People can use wire. But you have to keep it from sagging because how warm is it in the brood nest? Anybody remember? 90 degrees. So if you put a vertical piece of wax in there and it heats up to 90 degrees, it does this. And so what the bees will do is they'll draw this side out shallow and this side out deep. That is not usable comb. They can't functionally stay warm or store enough in the shallow side. So I recommend against it. But that's it. If you really have an aversion to plastic, you should explore the other options. And because if you're aversion to plastic, which I totally get, what you're doing is you're making a choice that I may have to cut some out and it's worth it to me. That is a perfectly fine approach to doing this. You should also know that you need mature wax comb to put in a extractor. So don't break your own heart by having your bees work super hard to draw all that wax and then open up your extractor and see it in 4 pieces. This is if you're using natural foundation, then you would use the previous year's comb. Our season is so short, I don't think it cures up well in 1 year. There's lots of debate about the cell size. This is small cell. 4.9 millimeters, standard is 5.3. I won't bore you with the history. The summary is that some people say, oh, if you go back to the natural size, it helps them manage varroa. The data doesn't back that up. All right. I use small cell. Why? It's because of what I started with. It's not because I think it works better. Which brings me to hive stand. You can either make a hive stand with a solid surface, or if you do one of those 2x4 things, there's a million ways to do it, or pallets, you can get a small piece of plywood to sit it on top of whatever hive stand you have that does not have that. That's fine. 2 different kinds of screen bottom boards. This is the standard one that comes with these poly hives. I don't like it. I've replaced all of mine. No, don't get me wrong, they work fine. See these scallops? Airflow. No. We do not want airflow. If you buy one of these, this is, by the way, this is how sturdy this is. This broke in shipment, and Nathan just glued it back together. It's fine. It's perfectly fine. All right. Here's what you do with these scallops. You're going to take tape, and you're going to tape the inside to close them off, and then you're going to tape the outside to close them off. And now you don't have airflow from below. We do not need extra ventilation. 99% about what you read about ventilation is wrong. Just flat wrong. It's old-fashioned way to look at it. Think about a tree cavity. Openings near the bottom. Do they get ventilation through the bottom of the trunk? Through the top of the trunk? No. No. Ventilation is a myth for the most part. Or I should say, the need for extra ventilation. So if you get one of these, because they don't have one of these, I made these myself, you can tell, because it looks like somebody that wasn't a carpenter built it. So this is a perfectly good one. There's no way for air to get in because my hive stand is on a solid surface. All right? So even though I have a screen bottom board, it's over a solid surface. Here's why that's important. This air gap over the winter underneath it will help dehydrate the carcasses of the bees that fall down so that you don't have bee stew in the spring where they freeze thaw, and then it's really gross. There may be some thermodynamic advantages through the way the convection process, but I don't understand that. I'm not going to try to pretend to do it. It doesn't hurt anything, I'll tell you, as long as it's over a solid surface, okay?
Now let's put it all together so that you'll be ready for your new package. Before we begin, select the frames you'll be using. Frames that already have drawn comb are the best, so use them if you've got them. Don't worry if there are dead bees in the comb. Your colony will quickly clean them out. If you don't have drawn comb, just make sure your foundation has a nice coat of beeswax over the plastic. Put a single box on top of your screened bottom board. If you use medium boxes, add 6 frames in the middle. If you use deeps, start with 5 frames. Now we need to shrink the size of your box to make it easier for your colony to keep it warm. Fill in the space on both sides with foam follower boards. Be sure to cover them with packing tape so the bees won't chew them up. If you bought a wooden inner cover, I'm sorry. They are obsolete. Set it aside. We're going to use a sheet of Reflectix instead. It will seal the gap above the box perfectly and provide a little extra insulation as well. It will also be much easier to work with all summer long. I recommend using a trickle feeder in the spring, which is just a jar of some kind with 4 to 6 small holes in the top. I put the feeder above a plastic container lid that has a hole cut out of the middle. The lid provides just enough space below it to ensure that multiple bees can access the feeding holes from below. The last step is to put an insulated box around the feeder jar and then put on the lid. Now you're all set, and good luck this year.